Lexi episode 514. I'm Master Sam, and today is one day after Thomas has become 8 years old. Originally, I was going to celebrate by making this video, but I decided I was going to do it down in my pilot reaction set because it was quicker. But today, we're going to dive into the history of the Railway series, how Thomas was born, and discuss a little bit about how the Thomas Show came to be, because the Thomas Show, we might say that for another topic, but we'll talk about the Railway series and then dive a little bit into, the TV adaptation and stuff. So, here we go. The Railway series is a series of books about the railways of the island of Silver. The books were created by the Reverend W. Awdry, who wrote the first stories in 1942. He wrote 26 books from 1945 to 1972. A further 16 books were written by his son Christopher Awdry. The final book in this series, Thomas and His Friends, was published in 2011. The series formed the basis for Thomas and Friends, with many of his books and stories being adapted to television. The books themselves also exist in the series universe. Time to dive into the origins. When Wilbur Awdry was a child, he was always interested in railways. Much like his father, he liked to watch trains on the Great Western Railway. To him, the noise of the locomotive's exhaust almost sounded like dialogue. For example, the larger engine having trouble climbing the hills would appear to be saying, "I can't do it, I can't do it." And the smaller engine helping them would sound like it was saying, "I will do it, I will do it." In 1942, Wilbur's son Christopher had measles and was confined to bed. To prevent their son being bored, Wilbur and his wife Margaret Awdry told him stories and nursery rhymes. Most of them eventually lost their continuing valuable. One that continually appealed to Christopher was the rhyme down by a station. Wilbur subsequently drew a picture of several engines standing in a row based on the rhyme for fun and gave the faces with various expressions. One sad-looking engine appealed to Christopher and shared his mood, and he asked what his name was. Wilbur replied, the first thing that comes to his head, Edward. Through a series of questions and answers, the story of Edward's Day Out was created. Eventually, Christopher began asking for more stories, and Awdry obliged him with Edward and Gordon and the sad story Harry, the latter being inspired by another rhyme he was fond of. Christopher would constantly ask for stories to be retold, even after he recovered, and to ensure consistency between telling. Wilbur wrote them down on the back of old church circulars. Margaret Awdry also liked stories and told her husband to get them published, as she felt they were better than most children's books in circulation. Awdry was reluctant, but Margaret persisted and mentioned the stories in a letter to Wilbur's mother, Lucy, who replied that she knew the author, Michael Bardsley, and that the stories to be sent to her so she could forward them to him. At Margaret's insistence, Wilbur did so. Bardsley's attempts to find a publisher were unsuccessful, so he showed the stories to his aunt, Edith Ray Gregorson, who liked them and agreed to pursue the matter further. Her attempts to find a publisher were initially no more successful, as most were suffering paper shortages due to the Second World War. But in September 1943, Edmund Ward agreed to publish them, though refused to commit a publication date to Wilbur's annoyance. In October, Ward wrote to say the stories would be published as one book entitled The Three Railway Engines, but he required rough sketches for his illustrator to base his pictures on and a fourth story to finish off the book. While Awdry was annoyed at the request, since Ward had already rejected his drawings, he agreed and wrote Edward, Gordon, and Henry. While it was hoped this would be a publication, the book was not published until May 12, 1945. That's how Thomas got his birthday. The book was an immediate commercial success, quickly selling out its initial print run of 22,500 copies, and going through 2 more by the end of the year. Awdry, while happy to see his book in print, was disappointed in the illustrations by William Middleton. Previously, in 1942, after the stories were written, Wilbur made Christopher a wooden model of Edward. However, Christopher apparently wanted a model of Gordon, but this could not be done. Instead, Awdry made a model of a tank engine from odds and ends, painted the loot and gave it to Christopher as a Christmas present. Christian the Mall engine, Thomas. After the publication of the Three Railway series. After the publication of the Three Railway engines in 1945, Christopher would then request stories about Thomas, and these stories would be published as Audrey's second and most famous book, Thomas the Tank Engine, in 1946. After Thomas the Tank Engine, Audrey was finished with writing any more books. However, due to popular demand, Audrey pressed onward. By the time Audrey stopped writing in 1972, the Railway series numbered 26 books. Christopher subsequently added 16 more books to the series, including the later two posthumous releases. The last book, Thomas and His Friends, was published in 2011 to commemorate Wilbur's century, particularly in the last story, Centenary. Since the publication of the last volume, while still being overshadowed by its television show counterpart, the Railway series legacy continued to grow to this day, with digital media titles of the first 4 books on Apple's Books app for a limited time, as well as being read aloud by Mr. Perkins, played by the late Ben Forster, and Mr. Evans, played by Mark Morgan, respectively on DVD, YouTube, and digital platforms. In addition, Sony Creative Products Inc. released a set of commemorative DVDs featuring some original book stories and their respective television adaptations to Japanese viewers. The current republication of Thomas and Friends, the complete edition, was released in bookstores in 2023 with the latest audiobook digital releases narrated by Bruce Alexander are available from Amazon Audible. Furthermore, since August 2021, the Italian Railway celebrated the works and life of the Reverend Audrey with a successive annual Audrey extravaganza weekend events. Now it's time to talk about the main books. So the books Reverend Audrey have created 26 books. Here are all of the books. The first one is the Three Railway engines. Edward Lavachet, Laura Troubles and Trucks, and Harry Shove and Pearl Speaking. And then the second one is Faithful Thomas the Tank Engine. A station pilot named Thomas longs to leave the jar and go out to the world and has several adventures. And then you got the third book is James the Red Engine. And the fourth book is Tank Engine Thomas again. The fifth one is Troublesome Engines. The sixth one is Henry the Green Engine. The seventh one is Toby the Tram Engine. The eighth one is Goran the Big Engine. The ninth one is Edward the Blue Engine. The 10th one is Ford Little Engine. The 11th one is Percy the Small Engine. The 12th one is the 8 Famous Engines. The 13th one is Douglas Diesel Engine. The 14th one is the Little Old Engine. The 15th one is the Twin Engines. The 16th one is the Branch Line Engines. The 17th one is Gallant Old Engine. The 18th one is Stephanie the Bluebell Engine. The 19th one is Mountain Engine. The 20th is Very Old Engine. The 21st is Mainline Engine. The 22nd is Small Railway Engine. The 23rd is Enterprising Engines. The 24th is Oliver the Western Engine. The 25th is Duke the Lost Engine. And the 26th is Tramway Engines. These volumes were later compiled into Thomas the Tank Engine complete collection. The complete collection of compilation was released by various publishers in different years and countries, all containing the same 26 volumes. The Reverend W. Audrey planned to call his 27th novel Releaseful Engines, but he never got to use it following his retirement. Christopher Audrey's first publication used the title for the official 27th volume series. So like we said, the 27th book, which now Christopher Audrey's writing, is Releaseful Engines. The 28th one is Diesel Engines. The 29th is Great Little Engines. The 30th is more about Thomas the Tank Engine. The 31st one is Gordon the High Speed Engine. The 32nd is Toby's Trucks and Trouble. The 33rd is Thomas and the Twins. The 34th is Jack the New Jock. The 35th is Thomas and the Great Railway Show. The 36th is Thomas Comes Home. The 37th Midnight Express. The 38th is Wilbur the Fourth engine. The 39th is Thomas and the Back Controller's engine. The 40th is New Little engine. The 41st is Thomas and Victoria. And the final one is Thomas and his friends. Volumes 27 and 41 were compiled into the Thomas and Victoria collection. Another book of the Railway series titled Barry the Rescue Engine was to be written by Christopher Audrey in the 1980s, so it was canceled. Christopher Audrey had other material which he hoped would be published. He read new stories about the nowadays engines at the Italian Railways Duncan Days event. However, these stories were never published. Okay, now it's time we dive into the TV series. The previous attempts of television. The first attempt to televise adapted stories from the Railway series books began in May 1953 when the BBC sent a letter to the Railway series editor, Eric Marriott, stating that they want to broadcast live 2 stories from the 3 railway engines using Hornby models and were as well as superimpose human characters and rain effects. Marriott agreed to this, but Wilbur Audrey was concerned about authenticity. During the live broadcast of the first episode on Sunday 14th June 1953, a failure to switch the set points resulted in heavy derailing and a hand was seen picking them up and putting it back on the rails. About a week later, news of the broadcast hit the front page of local newspapers and Audrey commented the broadcast was unprofessional and called the point switching debacle an elementary mistake. Further production was subsequently cancelled. I hate using that word. Years later, the BBC featured Audrey's stories again on the children's storytelling show Jacques and Ori. Sitting in a station master's office, host Ted Ray read 5 Railway series books and episodes that aired from September 20th to October 2nd, 1970. Then in 1973, Andrew Lloyd Webber, who had read the Railway series books as a child, approached Railway series publisher Kane Moore about adapting the books into a musical television program with 30-minute episodes. Wanting to secure more money from American investors, Lloyd's company wanted to control over everything written for the Railway series, past and future. Audrey and the publishers were apprehensive, and Audrey commented that once the Americans get hold of it, the whole series will be vulgarized and ruined. However, a contract was eventually signed and Audrey was paid in advance £500. Lloyd Webber pitched his idea to Granada Television, who commissioned a pilot episode featuring 2D cutouts of the engines moving along a background animated by Brian Cosgrove. By early 1976, the pilot was completed, but the Granada TV ultimately decided not to produce a full series, fearing that at the time, Audrey's stories were not popular enough outside the UK to justify the time and money needed to make the series. Lloyd Webber would later go on to produce a musical titled Starlight Express, loosely based on the Railway series as well as the story of Cinderella. Now, the true origins begin in 1979, where Allcraft, a British television producer, was making a 5-minute documentary on the resurgence of interest in steam railways, part of which featured an interview with the Reverend Audrey at the Bluebell Railway. Prior to interviewing Audrey, Allcraft had read some of the Railway series books and had become intrigued with the character stories and illustrations. After dinner one evening, Allcraft told Audrey that she believed that his stories were made to be brought to life and that she would like to be the one to do it. Audrey, however, replied that others had previously tried and failed to bring the Railway series stories to television. Nevertheless, in 1988, Allcraft negotiated television rights with the Railway series publishers Kane and Ward for £50,000, financed by getting a second mortgage on her family's Southampton home and loaning money from a local bank. Allcraft spent the next few years raising additional money for production and meeting with different animators to decide what type of animation would be used for the series. After meeting with Dave Mitton, co-founder of Clearwater Features, the two of them decided to use radio-controlled models for the steam engines of their vehicles, with static but interchangeable faces and moving eyes. After making a commitment from ITV, a low-budget pre-production test pilot based on the Railway series story Down the Line was filmed. After the pilot episode was test screened on April 3rd, 1983, ITV greenlit for a full series of 26 episodes. Allcraft was determined from the outset to use a single narrator instead of a voice cast. After overhearing him on television, she reached out to former Beatles drummer Ringo Starr and hired him to narrate the series. Upon hearing about Allcraft's endeavor, the manager of Starr's personal studio at the time, Mike O'Donnell, co-composed with Junior Campbell the opening theme song and submitted a demo to Allcraft, which after they were hired to compose music for the series. The first series was filmed at Clearwater's in-house studio in Battersea, a suburb of London. It featured 25 episodes based on stories from the first 8 Railway series books, and the 26th episode driven by Allcraft and Minnie, which they requested Orgy to publish as a book. The series was first broadcast from October 9th to 1984 to January 8th to 1985 and saw great success, due in part to quality of the original Railway series stories. Starr's fame in the live-action animation style, the series was later released on VHS and Betamax in the UK in 1985. And that, my friends, is the story of how the Railway series and TV series came to life. If you guys like this kind of documentary type of video, please like and subscribe, because you all know we love Thomas. Thomas is our number one. He's our GOAT. I'll see y'all in the next video.